please hit that like button, the subscribe button, and be sure to hit the bell for notifications. Are you ready, listeners? Let's jump on in. My kids had a horrible camping experience last spring when they believed they were attacked by what they called a werewolf. My kids were 15 and 16 at the time, my son and my daughter. They've grown up very close, and we live on a large property in northern Arkansas. We moved down here from Oregon, and we're not used to the humidity, but we love the South. The property we ended up purchasing had a lot to offer. Acres and acres of land, I think well over 100, and our own beautiful house. We got our own shop, a wood splitting area, and our very own fire pit. It's been lovely. We sometimes have a lot of deer that come through our property, mainly doe. We don't see too many bucks around our house. Occasionally though, you will see a couple here and there. My son and my daughter have been fortunate enough to grow up outside for the most part. Tons of hiking and camping. My kids are addicted. Last spring, May to be exact, they decided to do some good old backyard camping out on our acres of land. I know they hiked quite a few miles back. I haven't been back there far myself, but from what they tell me, there's a huge ridge back there, and even a couple of creeks throughout. They must have been a few miles back, and they set up camp. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to both of my kids screaming, banging on the sliding glass door. I quickly ran down to see what was wrong, and both of my children looked like they'd just both seen ghosts. They're both hyperventilating and scared. I asked them what on earth was going on, and they both proceeded to tell me they were in the tent sleeping when these two hairy wolves attacked their tent. They told me they sprinted all the way back here, and the wolves had destroyed their tent and were ferocious. They were convinced they were both going to die had they not gotten out of there as fast as they did. They said that the wolves seemed to be more focused on destroying the tent and weren't sure if they saw my children escape. Their mother and I weren't sure what to make of it all. Clearly something had really spooked them. They both crashed out in their rooms that night, and the next day I decided it was best if I went back to the campsite with them. We hiked quite a ways back. They weren't kidding when they originally told me they went way back into the woods. We came upon their campsite, and it had been torn to shreds. The tent was in pieces, and looked like a bear had rummaged through all their stuff. Everything was destroyed. Nothing was salvageable. I asked them if they were sure it wasn't just a bear, to which they told me what they looked like, and most definitely canine. I must be honest and say I was unsettled over the whole situation and left it to them, being they shouldn't be coming back here anymore. I don't know what large animal or animals live on our property, but let's hope they don't find their way back up to our house. I visited Lake Okanagan during the fall a few years back with family, and had a very large dog creature observe me from the wood line. Okanagan is located in Alberta, Canada, and stretches far. It's a great place to come and spend time with family. We were all on my dad's boat. There was 12 of us. Many of my aunts and uncles, cousins, etc. We were just drifting along in my dad's boat, heading more north. We got to a part probably within 100 feet of an area offshore where there are thick woods. I remember looking over and seeing two glowing eyes watching us go by. I looked closer because of what I'd seen, and noticed it was a large dog-like creature staring at us. I thought it looked German Shepherd-like, but it was hard to tell exactly what it was. I told many of my other family to look over, and there was panic and gasps at what they were seeing too. We all saw this thing, watching us as we slowly drifted away. We weren't sure what to make of it. Some of us brushed it off, while some of us were genuinely terrified of what this creature was. There are weird things out there, and I'm sure there's many species of animals that are undiscovered that we don't quite understand. I'm in my later 20s, and I live in Oklahoma. I moved out here when I was in high school and quickly made a lot of like-minded friends. These friends really took me out to great spots to hunt and do cool stuff. As I got older, I still maintained good relationships with my close friends, and I quickly learned of really great places to go hunting and exploring thanks to them. I live in northern Oklahoma, and the account that took place happened in eastern Oklahoma. This was in the fall. I want to say early October if I remember correctly. The leaves were already well into their color change, and I was out scouting for some good spots to set up a deer stand. I was on a friend's property due to him owning hundreds of acres of land out here. This was the cream of the crop. He had hunted here before many times, and I would sometimes find old tree stands he had set up. I, however, wanted to set up my own stand in my own spot. I had to find the prime locations. I did get a good warning from my friend, who expressed to me how important it was that I be careful. My friend had very recently had 5 of his goats killed and eaten, and was afraid of a big mountain lion in the area. He told me there were various bear traps set up throughout to try and catch this thing. I told him no problem, and that I would be safe. I had made it quite a way back to try and scout out a good spot. I wanted to get as far away from the property as I could, going off trail of the small trails that were made back here. As I'm traversing through the wilderness, I start hearing all this commotion. Screaming, howling, and growling. It sounded like a bear, but bigger. This animal sounded big, and there was a lot of hollering. I will admit I was scared, but also very curious. It sounded like this animal was in distress. I immediately thought about the bear traps and the big mountain lion that might be in the area. Maybe a mountain lion got caught in a trap. Although the sounds I was hearing sounded nothing like a large cat, and more like a giant bear or something. Against my better judgment, I decided I would cautiously check into the situation. The ruckus was only a few hundred yards away from my location, up over a ridge and around some rocks and brush. The hollering and screaming kept going on and on. It sounded stationary. The longer I walked, the more and more I was convinced something was stuck in a trap. Upon walking for about 20 or so minutes, maybe more, maybe less, I came to what was a clearing, with what I thought I could visibly see was this large, black wolf stuck in a bear trap. This thing was screaming and clawing at the trap. It was trying everything it could to break free. The first thing I thought when I saw this was werewolf. My jaw dropped. This thing was on 2 legs and was stuck in a bear trap. What the actual fuck? This is where I made my biggest mistake. Since it was stuck in this trap, I figured it couldn't get to me, so I approached it to get a better look at it. It looked over at me, coming to it, and growled at me. This thing was menacing. It had huge teeth and claws that could tear me to shreds. I was about 30 feet away from this thing, and it's still clawing and tearing at this bear trap. Maybe if I get closer, I can get a better picture, I thought. I took a few more steps and suddenly, this wolf stops and looks right at me. I've never seen an animal smirk in my entire life until this moment. It gave me the evilest smirk I've ever seen. It was haunting. It then immediately broke out of the bear trap and made it look totally effortless, and jumped high in the air. I didn't see where it went. My instincts kicked in with fight or flight. This was an ambush, a trap. I was done for. This thing lured me in to get me, and now I'm its next meal. I bolted out of there so fast, and surprisingly, nothing followed suit. I ended up getting back to my friend's house, told him to go shove it up his ass, and that he's got a werewolf walking around on his land. Of course, his reaction was totally shocked and in disbelief. He thought I was messing with him. I peaced out fast, and I don't ever go hunting there anymore. I stay clear of anywhere around there. I've done some research since, and have found Oklahoma to be a hotbed of encounters with werewolf-like beings and creatures. I don't think they're werewolves per se, but that's what they look like. These creatures are highly intelligent, I honestly feel that this thing pretended to be stuck in that trap until I got close enough. I thought it was going to get me. I feel like somehow this creature knew I was there, knew that I was in the area. Maybe it had been watching me or hunting me. I don't know why it didn't kill me on the spot. I'm thankful though. I'm glad that it allowed me to live. That encounter has made me much more hesitant with sounds that I'm not too familiar with, and I've learned the most important lesson of all. Always be aware of your surroundings. You never know when you're being stalked or watched. Before I tell you this story, I should note that I'm 33 years old and work as a mechanical engineer. I'm not religious or anything and have always been a no-nonsense type of person. I don't believe in supernatural or paranormal things or any of that stuff and never have. But what I encountered one night back in July of 2014, I honestly can't explain, and it's made me wonder. I live on the coast of Oregon in a small town called Depoa Bay. All along the coast is a highway called Highway 101 that goes all the way down to California, I believe, and all the way up through Oregon on the coast. Back in July of 2014, I had went camping in Newport, which is only a 20-minute drive away, but they have some really great camping spots if you know where to look. I have been an avid fan of the outdoors since I was a little one, and I love to go camping for a few days, just to escape. This encounter happened at night. I was driving back home to Depoa Bay, and it was roughly after 10 p.m. I was driving the 101 back home, and I remember I just left Newport not even 10 minutes ago. Usually, the 101 is fairly busy, but at this time at night, I was the only car on the road at the time. Since that was the case, I had my brights on and I noticed something large coming out onto the road from the right side. Now keep in mind that there is a lot of thick forest and marshland along this highway, because it's where the forest meets the coast, and because of that, there's a fair amount of elk and deer. My initial thought was that it was a deer, but as it stepped out onto the highway, it was standing on two legs, but looked like the biggest wolf I'd ever seen in my life. It took about a step or two out onto the road, and just stopped as I slowly approached it. I immediately slowed to a halt with my brights shining on it, and ended up what I would say to be around 50 feet roughly from it. Before I even stopped my vehicle, it turned its head and looked right at me, and just stared at me for roughly 5 to 10 seconds, before jumping off to the other side of the road in a flash. When it turned to stare at me, its eyes glowed a bright amber, and it definitely looked humanoid, but still very wolf-like. I froze in horror, and just stared at this thing in front of me, not knowing what to do. The scariest thing about it is, I grew up watching horror movies, and one of my favorite movies from being a teenager was the Howling series, and this thing resembled the werewolves in that movie very closely. Its mouth was partially open, but did not growl or show any form of aggression, but I stared at it long enough to where I could see that every tooth in its mouth were razor sharp and curved backwards at the tip. It had two huge canines, kind of like a saber-toothed tiger would, but obviously not that pronounced. They were big enough though. They looked like they hung on the outside of its mouth. I would say it was roughly 8 feet tall and was built like Arnold Schwarzenegger, covered in black fur. I had my windows rolled down, but I didn't smell anything. After it went to the other side of the road, I just sat there frozen and terrified. I drove home and didn't really sleep that night, and haven't really told anybody about my encounter, except a close friend. I will never drive the 101 anymore after dark. This happened to me when I was younger, around 16. I lived out in the boonies with my parents and my uncle, and I was up late one night. My uncle had fallen on hard times recently, and he was staying with us temporarily in our basement. I was in my room and I felt this immense feeling of dread, and I noticed the hair on the back of my neck started to stand up. This started to worry me, and I began to feel like I was being watched. I looked out my window, but I didn't see anything. I went back to watching TV, and the feeling was still there, so I just tried to ignore it. A little while later, I decided to crash out, and as I went to go and lay down, not even a few moments later, I hear something by my window. I thought it was an animal, like a raccoon or maybe a coyote, since we live out in the middle of nowhere. But the feeling of dread and being watched only increased tenfold, and when I turned to look, all I saw was this massive wolf head with glowing red eyes, staring right through the window. I almost pissed myself right there, out of sheer terror. This thing looked very angry and very evil. Its eyes glowed a bright red, and it was very unnatural and demonic. After a couple seconds of staring at me, I swear it grinned at me, and it was the most evil type of grin you could ever see. It reminded me of watching The Grinch, and how when little Susie comes out, he gives the camera that sinister looking grin, like he's about to do something bad. I literally grabbed my covers and covered myself and just turned away from the window and waited for it to go away. After about 10 minutes of looking away from the window, I looked back and didn't see the thing anymore. I went and slept in the basement with my uncle the rest of the night. In fact, after that, I slept in my uncle's room with him 4 weeks afterwards. My parents don't believe in this kind of stuff, but my uncle is a huge buff in the paranormal, and so I told him about what I experienced, and he believes me.